Hello, everyone. So I know a lot of my audience here is probably ex-Mormon like I am. And I know from Reddit that a high proportion of people who claim to be ex-Mormon, at least on Reddit, are also identifying as either atheist or agnostic. And therefore, I think it's safe to assume that at least some of you are atheists. Well, I learned recently that although you identify as an atheist, according to at least one person, you may not actually be an atheist. Because apparently, to identify as an atheist, you don't only need to believe actively that there is no God, you actually need to be sure that there is no God. So I'm going to read a conversation that I had with this person, or most of a conversation I had with this person. I'm going to skip the irrelevant parts. Um, and I'm going to talk about what I feel about this conversation as we go along. And you can decide for yourself whether I handled this conversation correctly and what your thoughts are on the definitions of words, particularly the word atheist. So, to start off with, the commenter I was responding to was commenting on a post that asked, "Are atheists generally smarter than religious people?" And the commenter said, "No, that's not a fair statement. There are a few reasons for that," and then gave a few reasons. But I'm going to focus on the second reason because that's the reason that this commenter and I continued to talk about for some time. 2. Religious beliefs, surety that there is a God, are no more delusional than the surety that there is no God, which is the atheist perspective. Now, I took issue in one way or another with all of the points that this person made, and so I responded to those points one by one. But I'm going to focus, like I said, on point number 2 because I think that is the most interesting point, and it's the point that I feel that I know most about in terms of why I took issue with it. The other points, if you actually look at the conversation, I wasn't as confident in my stance on. I could have been wrong on all of them. But this has more to do with definitions of words. And I feel like I know a little bit about that, at least, having taken a linguistics class and so forth. And so I'm more confident in my stance on this particular issue. So here's what I said regarding point 2. Point 2 here is inaccurate because many people who call themselves atheists are agnostic atheists, claiming no surety about God one way or the other. Then this person responded to all of my responses to their points, saying, "Point 2 is an entirely accurate statement, as atheism and agnosticism are fundamentally different belief systems. As such, one cannot by definition be atheist and agnostic, as agnosticism may be divided into camps that lean towards and against the possible existence of a God, with the only unifying characteristic being lack of surety. An atheist is an entirely separate definition, where surety of the non-existence of a God is present." So that is this person's stance on atheism. Here's what I said next. Point 2 is still inaccurate. Atheism means whatever it's used to mean. Atheism is often used to mean a mere lack of belief in God, and it is entirely possible to identify as an agnostic atheist. Then here's what they said. 2. Words have definitions. You don't get to throw artistic license around just because you want to call yourself something you aren't. Then here's what I said. You are the first person I have ever encountered claiming that atheism requires certainty, or that religious belief requires certainty for that matter. What good is your definition if it's only used by you? In my opinion, you have bought into a tactic used by religious people to smear the people who identify as atheists by claiming they all think a certain way. In my experience, most of the people I've observed who identify as atheists don't claim certainty at all. And if the survey was dealing with self-reported atheists, many of them likely fall into that camp. Therefore, we are talking about people that you would define as agnostics, as well as people you would define as atheists, whether you like it or not. That was in reference to the original post where they talked about a survey in which atheists, by whatever definition they were using the term, appeared to score higher on IQ tests on average than religious people. So then at that point, this person kind of backed off and said this: I really like talking with you, even though I think your assessment is totally off. You clearly give these things a lot of thought. Thank you for your dialogue. Smiley face. And I don't know if that was just to avoid contention. Um, I really don't know. It just seemed like a kind of backing off. So here's what I said. Yeah, thanks for the conversation. It's been good for me to work through what I thought, even though we clearly reached very different conclusions. Looking back, I think we really didn't budge, either one of us, very much. So I don't know how much it was helpful for for the other person, but for me, it was definitely helpful to clarify my thoughts on not just this, but some other points that we went over. Um, then I said, also, just to be clear, I don't actually go around calling myself an atheist for the most part, because while you're the first one I've seen who said it requires certainty, I was already aware of many people insisting that it requires at least a belief that there is no God, and I don't like to imply that about myself. I prefer the term agnostic by itself, even though I keep running into people online who tell me I'm really an agnostic atheist because I don't actively believe in God either, and their definition of atheism is mere lack of belief. So then this person got back to me and said, well, the reason I'm more insistent about the definitions of the words is because I think people tend to associate their disbelief in God as a victory of reason over emotion. And the entire point is to demonstrate that they don't even actually believe what they think they believe. Agnostic atheism is really just agnosticism with a touch of cynicism. It's not atheistic. True atheism is the same purely emotional choice that following a religion is. And when people see that, they always, every time without fail, start reevaluating their beliefs. So I had all day to think about that, and it surprised me thinking about this without being able to reference the actual comment because I was at work. That people would actually change their mind on this and that this person was aware of this based on what this person said. Looking back, I'm really not sure if this person has any examples or not. I didn't actually ask, so I don't actually know. But I almost commented, that's surprising that people actually change their minds when you tell them that they don't believe what they think they believe. That just kind of seemed a little weird to me. But here's what I actually ended up saying. Huh, that's interesting. For me, I feel like insisting on a more narrow definition of atheism than what everyone else seems to be using is allowing you to ignore a trend in what happens when people step away from religious belief. The truth is, most people who call themselves atheists aren't atheists by your definition, not because they don't know what they believe, but because they use the word atheism differently than you. The people you call atheists are the ones I would call Gnostic atheists as opposed to agnostic atheists. I would also split theists into Gnostic and agnostic groups. Now, among the theists, a much higher portion of people would describe themselves as certain of their position compared to self-proclaimed atheists. Because whether you call it atheism or not, a step away from religion is usually also a step into accepting uncertainty. Also, if I remember correctly, by your definition, a person without certainty can't be a religious believer either. So people who say they are believers but have doubts don't count. You can correct me if I'm wrong, that's just the impression I got. The trouble is, I think belief should mean belief, not certainty. And what I mean by that is that if belief means one thing in one case is where it means just thinking that there is a greater than 50% chance that something is true in certain cases, um, then why shouldn't it also mean that in the context of religion? If it means certainty, it should mean certainty everywhere and be a synonym for certainty. And I just don't think it's used that way in society. And so it bothers me when a word is used to mean one thing in one case and another thing in another case. At least it bothers me when those two cases are similar but slightly different, because then it seems like the implied meaning from one case will carry over to the other case. And that just seems like asking for problems and arguments to me. So then this person said, "Your takeaway from what I said is generally correct, although I would like to think that I'm not ignoring the trend so much as attempting to define it. There is power in naming things. People misusing a word they use to describe themselves is a big deal." So there are a couple things I want to mention from this. One is that I think we were kind of talking past each other at this point, because the trend I was talking about was the trend of losing your religious belief being tied into gaining uncertainty in a lot of cases. Um, and I think that that's a good thing. I think that when you stop being so certain about certain things, often it's a sign of progression, because as you get older, often you become less certain of certain things as you realize more and more that things you thought when you were younger often aren't a complete picture of the situation. And then the other thing is that this person said there is power in naming things. Well, I think there's only power in naming things if people actually go along with the way you name things. And in this case, I just don't think that person has the power that they think they have, because most people just don't define atheism that way. And I don't think they're going to, regardless of what this person says. But here's what I said in response to that. See, I don't see it as misusing a word at all. Atheist is a word. Sorry. Atheist as a word is a set of sounds, and in the context of the English language, the prefix a means not, like in the word amoral. So atheist is understood to mean not theist. But regardless of what it's understood to mean now, words change meanings all the time. If I were to call my lamp an atheist as a joke, and then for some reason that usage of that particular set of sounds went viral, and everyone started calling their lamps atheists, there wouldn't be anything fundamentally wrong with that. Not any more than with calling a butterfly, even though the word originally came from the messed up pronunciation of the words flutter by. I'm not going to insist that words continue to have the same meanings they've always had without changing. And if everyone started using the term atheist the way, your way, I'd be okay with that too. But until then, I don't see what grounds you have to say everyone else is wrong, except to appeal to a God the self-proclaimed atheists don't believe in. Edit. Actually, I just read up on the history of the term atheist, and apparently it comes from a Greek word, and the prefix a used to mean without. In the past, it was often used as a pejorative for people who believed in different gods or kinds of gods than the person speaking. But over time, it became a reference to godlessness by all definitions of God at once. So really, what you're proposing is a definition much narrower than the original. And it seems like you're doing this because you want to be able to say all atheists think like religious people anyway, when in reality, most people who identify as atheists don't think that way. For the record, I think that the kind of atheism you're describing when you use the word atheist is an unreasonable position, depending on how God is defined in the first place. But I'm pretty certain that an eternal, all-powerful, all-knowing, and perfect God, who is involved in our lives to the extent that many religious people believe, doesn't exist, because otherwise the world would look different than it does right now. Other kinds of God are a possibility, though. And then this person didn't respond to me, either because I made them think or because they were sick of talking to me. I don't know. I gave a pretty long comment, so maybe I just lack social awareness and ran this conversation into the dust by talking way too much. But I thought this was a really interesting conversation, and I wanted to comment on it here because it really made me think about what I think about the definitions of words. Because in general, I'm a person that tends to push back on words changing definitions, even though when I actually think about it, I don't think words changing definitions in and of themselves is a bad thing. I think what can be bad is when a word changes, and then by changing that word, a lot of other words also change their meanings by nature of being related to that word. And it changes the way people think about certain things in ways that may or may not be actually good. Um, For example, in the atheist lamp analogy I used, I think that that could be either a good or a bad thing depending on what kind of context calling lamps atheists brought to the conversation about people atheists. Because people use would start to associate the characteristics of a lamp with the characteristics of people who identify as atheists and vice versa. And that could be kind of weird. But I think that eventually, depending on the situation, it doesn't have to be either a bad thing or a good thing to start using a word to refer to more things, especially. So hopefully you enjoyed this analysis of this conversation. Let me know what you think about it in the comments. Do you think I am correct in my opinion about this, or do you think that I'm wrong and that atheists should be 100% certain no matter what? Also, if you like this video, please like it and consider subscribing. I'll see you all next time. Bye.